objective, after listening to this module, you'll be able to identify common distorted thinking styles that can be the source of significant stress for many people. Distorted thinking styles. Going back to the model of stress, remember that it's our thoughts that trigger the chain reaction or the stress response. So it's critical that we learn to become in tune with our thoughts and perceptions and be aware of how those thoughts and perceptions perpetuate or exacerbate stress and anxiety. Cognitive distortions are simply the act of the mind convincing oneself of something that simply isn't true. You could say that the hallmark of a cognitive distortion is irrational thinking, blanketed in negativity. The end result of cognitive distortions can be engaging in toxic acts of self-sabotage. This kind of thinking can become exacerbated, especially during times of great stress. And when these distortions become overwhelming, they often lead to depression and anxiety. Many of these distortions are unconsciously done. We don't realize that we're thinking them. As each cognitive distortion is presented, take a step back and objectively assess which ones might be prevalent in your thinking. Filtering. This is when you take negative details and magnify them while filtering out all positive aspects of a situation. A single detail may be picked out and the whole event becomes colored by this detail. When you pull negative things out of context, isolated from all the good experiences around you, you make them larger and more awful than they really are. An example of this is an evaluation you received from your boss in which there were tons of positive comments, but one or two comments with constructive feedback, and you focus only on those one or two comments that you perceive to be negative criticism, while pretty much ignoring all the positive comments. Polarized thinking. The hallmark of this distortion is an inconsistence on dichotomous choices. Things are black or white, good or bad. You tend to perceive everything at the extremes, with very little room for a middle ground. The greatest danger in polarized thinking is its impact on how you judge yourself. For example, you have to be perfect or you're a failure. Overgeneralization. You come to a general conclusion based on a single incident or piece of evidence. If something bad happens once, you expect it to happen over and over again. Always and never are cues that this style of thinking is being utilized. This distortion can lead to a restricted life as you avoid future failures based on the single incident or event. Mind reading. Without their saying so, you think you know what people are feeling and why they act the way they do. Mind reading depends on a process called projection. You imagine that people feel the same way you do and react to things the same way you do. Therefore, you don't watch or listen carefully enough to notice that they are actually different. Mind readers tend to jump to conclusions. Catastrophizing. You expect disaster. You notice or hear about a problem and start what ifs. What if that happens to me? What if tragedy strikes? An underlying catalyst for this style of thinking is that you do not trust in yourself and your capacity to adapt to change. Personalization. This is the tendency to relate everything around you. For example, thinking that everything people do or say is some kind of reaction to you. You also compare yourself to others, trying to determine who's smarter, better looking, etc. The underlying assumption is that your worth is in question. You are therefore continually forced to test your value as a person by measuring yourself against others. If you come out better, you get a moment's relief. If you come up short, you feel diminished. The basic thinking error is that you interpret each experience, each conversation, each look as a clue to your worth and value. Control fallacies. There are two types of control fallacies: externally controlled and internally controlled. Externally controlled means that we view our behavior and success as something that is beyond our control. Not from within, but something external from ourselves. In other words, we are helpless victims of fate and happenstance. Externally controlled beliefs sound like excuses. It shows that you have no personal responsibility for your life. Nobody wants to hire someone who constantly says it was bad luck, fate, or just not in the cards when something goes wrong. The internal control fallacy is the belief that somehow you are responsible for the pain, happiness, failures, and successes of everyone around you. Fallacy of fairness. You feel resentful because you think you know what's fair, but other people may not agree with you. Fairness is so conveniently defined, so temptingly self-serving, that each person gets locked into his or her own point of view. It's tempting to make assumptions about how things would change if people were only fair or really valued you. But the other person hardly ever sees it that way, and you end up causing yourself a lot of pain and an ever-growing resentment. Blaming. You hold other people responsible for your pain, or take the other tack and blame yourself for every problem. Blaming often involves making someone else responsible for choices and decisions that are actually our own responsibility. Shoulds. You have a list of ironclad rules about how you and other people should act. People who break the rules anger you, and you feel guilty if you violate the rules. The rules are right and indisputable, and as a result, you are often in the position of judging and finding fault in yourself and in others. The top cue word indicating the presence of this distortion is should. Emotional reasoning. You believe that what you feel must be true automatically. If you feel stupid or boring, then you must be stupid and boring. If you feel guilty, then you must have done something wrong. The problem with emotional reasoning is that our emotions interact and correlate with our thinking process. Therefore, if you have distorted thoughts and beliefs, your emotions will reflect these distortions. Fallacy of change. You expect that other people will change to suit you if you just pressure them enough. You need to change people because your hopes for happiness seem to depend entirely on them. The truth is, the only person you can really control or have much hope of changing is yourself. The underlying assumption of this thinking style is that your happiness depends on the actions of others. Your happiness actually depends on the thousands of large and small choices you make in your life. Global labeling. You generalize one or two qualities in yourself or others into a negative global judgment. Global labeling ignores all contrary evidence, creating a view of the world that can be stereotyped and one-dimensional. Labeling yourself can have a negative and insidious impact upon your self-esteem, while labeling others can lead to snap judgments, relationship problems, and prejudice. Being right. You feel continually on trial to prove that your opinions and actions are correct. Being wrong is unthinkable, and you will go to any length to demonstrate your rightness. Having to be right often makes you hard of hearing. You aren't interested in the possible veracity of a different opinion, only in defending your own. Being right becomes more important than an honest and caring relationship. Heaven's reward fallacy. You expect all your sacrifice and self-denial to pay off, as if there were someone keeping score. You feel bitter when the reward doesn't come as expected. The problem is that while you are always doing the quote-unquote right thing, if your heart really isn't in it, you are physically and emotionally depleting yourself. Key points. There are 15 common distorted thinking styles. Many of us use at least a handful without realizing it. These distortions can be the source of significant stress throughout our lives. And that's it.